It's time for Tech Talk with Mathew Dickerson. And I'm your host, Tony Graham. Today, Matthew.
Hey, good afternoon, Tony. Great to be chatting to you again.
Always. Now, to start with, could water-filled windows make a huge splash when it comes to saving energy and reducing global carbon emissions?
Yeah, I think they could actually, Tony. There's a whole range of things that people have been focusing on in trying to insulate homes better. And obviously windows is something that's a nice thing to have on a home, but it's actually a lot of heat loss and heat gain in summer that goes through a window. You've got all these wonderful brick walls and you've got insulation inside them, and that's really good at trying to protect the outside from the inside. But windows is one of those weak points, and you see people experiment with, say, double glazed windows, even triple glazed windows, and a lot of this research comes out of the UK, where obviously it gets very old. But the latest issue is actually putting water in the windows. And when I first started reading this article, I thought it was just an issue where they were using water, because sometimes with double or triple glazed, they'll use an inert gas. But I thought they might have been using water just because it's got some good heat density, heat capacity, so that it would be absorbing some of that heat or not allowing some of that heat to be lost out of the house. But they're actually talking about circulating water through your windows and using that in other parts of the house. So using it to actually heat up your house and really create a barrier there between your house and the outside world via the window. So the water obviously is visible, it's invisible, you can see straight through it, so you're not worried about that. But the window is actually filled with water, and that water is then circulated through other parts of the house. So it's going a step further than I even thought they would go, which again is all about trying to make sure that you can insulate your house better. And if you can do that, there's a huge cost that can be saved in your air conditioning, and obviously a huge benefit to the environment if you're not burning extra coal to try and heat your house, or again in summer to try and cool your house down. So yeah, a bit of, I suppose, out there thinking from someone who came up with a crazy idea, and next thing you know, they're starting to put it into practice.
Yeah, well, I wonder what they use to stop the algae from growing in the water. Imagine that would be a big problem with that.
Yeah, look, I assume that when the circulating water is going through, there'd be some sort of chlorination that would be required. And they didn't. The article I read didn't talk about some of that sort of process. It just talked about circulating water. But you're right, if you're keeping the water heated up to a nice temperature, then it's making things want to grow in that water even more. So there'd have to be some sort of treatment process in there, I'd imagine. But again, it seemed like it was much cheaper to do that and to pump water around than it is to try and heat the home and allow for that heat loss going out through the window.
Yeah, very interesting concept, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, what decision has the New Zealand news site Stuff taken with Facebook?
Now, look, I'm not familiar with Stuff. I'm not sure if you read Stuff, but it's quite a good name
I don't read Stuff.
for a site. And they've actually gone, we talked last week about the fact there are some large companies that are boycotting Facebook. And this particular site, again, has said, we're not just going to boycott Facebook for the month of July. We're basically saying that we're not using Facebook anymore. And they're doing that on principle. They believe that they will make a difference by saying we're going to make an in-principle decision and hope that other people follow on. And it's not like they don't use Facebook. This particular site has got 953,000, call it 1 million people that follow them on Facebook, and 134,000 on Instagram. So there's some pretty big numbers for a country like New Zealand that's only fairly small. To have 1 million people following a Facebook page is pretty big. So it would have been a pretty big decision for them to talk about and actually discuss before they reach that point. But again, this whole response we're seeing around the world, where a lot of people are saying that Facebook is doing more harm than good in the community, and these large organisations are voting with their feet. They're stopping the spend in Facebook and hoping that will actually lead to some change in Facebook. And as we talked about last week, poor old Mark Zuckerberg got $10 billion knocked off his net worth just by the drop in share price of Facebook. So I think there might be some argument there that someone for $10 billion might start to make a few changes in their business model.
Yes, it's quite interesting, and it's a brave decision, but it's probably an interesting decision from the point of view of taking a stance like that. It's going to get them a lot of publicity, isn't it?
Well, here we are in Wellington talking about Stuff in New Zealand. I've never heard of it before. You haven't heard of it. Some of your listeners might not have heard of it. So you're right. They actually are probably getting some extra publicity out of the fact that they're taking a stance on it. So I don't know that was their intention, but it might be a little side benefit of their principled stand.
Yes, it could lead to other things. We'll wait and see, won't we?
Yeah.
Now, a very contentious decision was made by Australia to block Huawei from supplying the 5G network in Australia. And as part of the Five Eyes network, both Australia and I know the United States and Canada were very concerned that the UK decided not to go with that decision entirely. So, but now they're taking another look at it, aren't they? So they seem to be looking at backflipping on their previous decision with Huawei.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, they are looking to backflip on that completely. They've had another look at it now, and obviously there's been a bit of pressure from other countries around the world. There's some suspicion, some concerns about Huawei being involved. It's all well and good to have someone buy an individual Huawei phone, but when you start having Huawei build the entire mobile network, then that's obviously a bit of a concern. And you did mention some of those countries, New Zealand, Japan, Taiwan, the United States, have all basically gone down that path of saying we're not having Huawei involved in building our mobile phone network. The UK stood out like a sore thumb out of the group of countries that had said no and they'd said yes. But they are looking at it now. The National Cyber Security Centre in the UK has basically been instructed to review the situation and have a look as to whether or not they think it's safe, because Huawei haven't built a 5G network in the UK yet. The decision had been made that they would be used, but I don't think any contracts have been signed. I think they'd actually physically started to roll out. It was more an in-principle decision to use them, but now I suspect that pressure from other nations will result in the fact that Huawei will also be banned in the UK, which is not great for Huawei, and I suppose maybe they've got to look at exactly what they're doing, how they're doing it, and if they want to build networks around the world, they might have to have a little bit more transparency at what's involved in the technology behind their networks, or maybe they just give up and say, we tried and we failed.
Well, I think the biggest issue here, Matthew, is actually the Chinese Communist Party deciding that should they want to, they can control what all their companies do around the world. They can plug into any one of their companies and decide that they can tell them basically what to do, so they can't operate independently anymore. And that's the problem with this.
Yeah.
And I have to say, it is a sovereign risk for them to pass that law in many other areas as well on their part.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely spot on. And certainly there's obviously a lack of trust of Chinese organisations. And when you do get the Communist Party involved, there's certainly that lack of trust. And that's what we're seeing in some countries around the world. So that's where Huawei as a company have got to make decisions. They've got some different strings pulling that particular company, as opposed to many companies around the world are just worried about providing service and making a few dollars. They've also got that additional component of their government behind them.
That's correct, yeah. And you've been listening to Tech Talk with Mathew Dickerson on Binjang 91.5. Stay tuned next week, same times, 3:40 and 10:40 a.m. Should I say, stay tuned next week at 3:40 p.m. and 10:40 a.m. for the next edition. And it's back to the great music and community information on Binjang.
And Tony, this broadcast has been brought to you free of any Huawei 5G connections.
Yes.